感谢神，今天让我有这个机会能到喜乐坡教会。
Uh, thank God that Hillsborough Church is always very wonderful at hosting many of the major Eastern region events.
我们也很感谢神，喜乐坡教会有神的带领，可以常常举办一些东区的圣工。
As for Elizabeth Church, we always send our students over for every student spiritual convocation, including the one that just finished this past week.
我们伊丽莎白的很多小朋友，然后都会来这边来参加学生年会，比如说我们刚结束的一个。
And so we are always very grateful for the hospitality that Hillsborough shows for all the visitors.
我们一直以来都很感谢喜乐坡教会能够来帮忙这样的圣工。
So for this morning's message, I would like to share a passage from Acts chapter 27.
今天我想要跟大家分享的一个经文是从使徒行传27章开始。
So Acts chapter, if we all open our Bibles to Acts chapter 27, verses 16 to 26.
请大家翻开使徒行传27章，从16节开始。
So Acts chapter 27, we'll be reading from verses 16 to 26.
我们从使徒行传27章16节到26节。
So verse 16.
16节。
And running under the shelter of an island called Clauda, we secured the skiff with difficulty. Verse 17.
17节。
When they had taken it on board, they used cables to undergird the ship, and fearing lest they should run aground on the Syrtis sands, they struck sail and so were driven. 18. And because we were exceedingly tempest-tossed, the next day they lightened the ship. 19.
19节。
On the third day, we threw the ship's tackle overboard with our own hands. 20.
20节。
Now when neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, and no small tempest beat on us, all hope that we would be saved was finally given up. 21.
21节。
But after long abstinence from food, then Paul stood in the midst of them and said, Men, you should have listened to me and not have sailed from Crete and incurred this disaster and loss. 22.
22节。
And now I urge you to take heart, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship. 23.
23节。
For there stood by me this night an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I serve. 24.
24节。
Saying, Do not be afraid, Paul. You must be brought before Caesar, and indeed God has granted you all those who sail with you. 25.
25节。
Therefore take heart, men, for I believe God that it will be just as it was told me. 26.
26节。
However, we must run aground on a certain island. For me, this is one of my favorite stories of Paul.
这个经节是我还蛮喜欢保罗的一个记载。
We usually think of Paul as someone who was so faithful with such a fervent heart that he was never afraid to die for God.
我们所知道的保罗是一个对神很热心，然后不畏惧为神死的一个工人。
But we see here in moments like these, when Paul was in the middle of was in a ship in the middle of the sea, in a storm for 14 days.
然后我们这边看到保罗他在一个船上，在海中，然后受到了风暴里面，在风暴里面14天。
And the Bible records that Paul is still very much human like we are.
然后我们这边可以看到保罗跟我们一样是个人。
So he is not immune to hopelessness.
他也是会有绝望的时候。
Paul also had his moments where he became afraid.
他也会害怕。
And so even though Paul never specifically mentions that he was afraid, but we see from the words that the angel tells him, it reveals his heart.
虽然这边没有记载说保罗害怕，可是我们从天使跟他讲的话，我们可以知道保罗是心里有恐惧的。
And so we know for us today that storms represent difficulties and challenges in our lives.
今天在我们生活上来讲，这个风暴有时候可以是指其他的难处。
And so even though we may not physically be on a boat,
也许我们今天不会坐在船上。
But we feel the storms of our lives always shaking us inside of our hearts.
可是我们可以感觉到有些风暴也是会在我们心中作浪。
And even though everything around us physically may be calm and steady,
也许我们周遭的东西都是平静安稳的，
but our hearts can deal with very strong winds and waves that keep throwing us off balance.
可是我们心中会有不同的风暴在发生。
We often struggle with instability and uncertainty of our future.
比如说，我们对未来的不确定，
We have worries and anxieties that causes storms in our hearts.
我们有一些焦虑，然后所以会让我们心中感到不安。
Even though Paul was in the storm for 14 days, it might not feel like a very long time.
我们这边看起来记载写14天，可是我感觉起来好像没有很长。
But we know that when we are dealing with problems in our lives, each day feels very long.
可是我们知道，如果我们在面对困难的时候，我们会觉得度日如年。
Each minute of difficulty always feels like forever.
每一分钟都非常的煎熬。
Especially in Paul's case, and oftentimes in our lives, we do not know how long these storms will last.
就像保罗，或者是像我们生活上所遇到的一样，我们不知道这个艰难会维持多久。
And so here in Acts chapter 27, it records about the details of the storm that Paul encounters on his way to Rome.
使徒行传27章这边讲到说，保罗他要去罗马路上发生的事。
And so in the early parts of this chapter, we see they try to force their way through the storm.
这边我们前面有看到说，他们想要强行通过这个风暴。
And as we read in verse 17, they are actually at one point very close to land, this place called Syrtis Sands.
这边17章他们讲说，他们船的时候离塞尔底非常接近。
So they actually have an opportunity to get on land, but instead, the winds and the waves make it too hard for them to dock.
然后可是这边风太大，然后所以他们就没有办法停下来。
Because if they draw too close to the land in such unstable circumstances, it would cause the ship to run aground.
因为他们那边当时风浪太大，然后如果他们强行要停靠的话，船也许会搁浅。
And so we see that they struck sail and they go back into the waters.
所以他们又让船飘回海上。
And after that, they start to throw things overboard in order to lighten the ship.
然后我们接下来看到他们把货物抛在海里，然后让船能够轻一点。
Anything that is not necessary gets thrown overboard.
比较不重要的东西都先开始丢。
But we see they actually keep 2 items on board.
可是我们看到他们留了两种东西在船上。
In verse 16, we see that it says that they secured the skiff with difficulty.
16节那边讲说，那个船紧紧的收住。
And it's a skiff is a lifeboat that is used. It's a smaller lifeboat which is used in times of emergency.
这个紧紧收住这个小船，然后小船通常是如果在危难的时候会需要的。
And so obviously this is a form of backup and insurance policy for them to use.
你看，这是一个备用的方案。
And so we see that they hold on to this with great difficulty.
我们这边16节看到他们说，紧紧的收住小船。
And the second item that they hold on to, we see later on, is food.
然后接下来我们看到他们留在船上的就是食物。
And at this time, they feel that both of these items are essential to their survival.
他们觉得这2件东西是对他们来讲非常重要的。
And everything else just gets thrown overboard in order for them to lighten the weight of the ship.
其他的货物都丢到海里，因为这样子可以让船轻一点。
But we see that in the following verses that the storm just continues raging against them to the point where they give up hope.
可是我们继续看呢，他们因为风浪继续的增大，让他们的指望都绝了。
And so we see the depth of their hopelessness and despair of everyone on the ship in verse 20.
我们20节可以看到他们的都有多么的绝望。
Verse 20 says, Now when neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, and no small tempest beat on us, all hope that we would be saved was finally given up.
20节，太阳和星辰多日不得显露，又有狂风大浪吹逼，我们的指望就都绝了。
And so here it says that there was this collective feeling of hopelessness on the ship.
我们这边可以感到他们在船上有多么的绝望。
They did not see any stars or the sun for many days.
他们多日看不到太阳跟星辰。
And so not being able to see the star or the sun, the stars or the sun is not just a losing of track of time.
看不到太阳星辰，不只是你不知道时间了。
But most importantly, it's an indication of not knowing their own location.
这也是代表说，他们其实根本不知道他们身在何处。
Back then, they did not have the technology of GPS or radars.
在古时候，他们没有GPS 或是雷达。
So instead, at that time, the sailors they used the position of the stars to determine their own location.
所以那时候航海员他们会用星象，然后来决定他们的地点在哪里。
And so where the sun rose and where the sun set was also a reference point for them to know which direction to go in.
太阳从何处升起，何处降下，也是他们的一个指标。
And so for these men on the ship, not being able to see the stars or the sun indicates how completely lost they are.
所以这边讲到说，他们看不到日夜星辰，表示他们完全不知道他们在哪里。
Not only did they not know where the direction of the storm would take them,
不止他们不知道这个风暴会把他们带到哪里，
but in the middle of a great sea, they are not even sure exactly where they are.
可是他们更不知道他们自己在哪里。
And so, just like everyone else on the ship, Paul is also discouraged.
就像其他人一样，保罗他的希望也不是很高。
And so we see here that Paul, he stands up and he starts to speak.
然后接下来我们就看到保罗站起来讲话。
In verse 21, he says that, Men, you should have listened to me and not have sailed from Crete and incurred this disaster.
21节，保罗这边说到：众位，你们本应当听我，不应该离开克里特。
And so, actually, this is a reference to verses 10 and 11.
这是在10节、11节的时候讲到的。
Here, and if we look at Acts chapter 27, verse 10 and 11.
我们来看《使徒行传》第27章第10节、11节。
And so Paul advised them, saying, Men, I perceive that this voyage will end with disaster and much loss, not only of the cargo and ship, but also our lives. Verse 11.
11节。
Nevertheless, the centurion was more persuaded by the helmsman and the owner of the ship than by the things spoken by Paul. And so later on in this chapter, we see that there are 276 passengers on this ship.
这边后来我们看到他有记载说，整个船上有276人。
And these 276 passengers generally fall into three different groups of people.
276人大概分成3种类型
And
的人。
the first group of people on the ship, of course, are sailors.
当然有船员。
And so in order to maneuver a ship that is large enough to hold 276 passengers would require very experienced and skilled sailors.
如果要操纵一艘能够载276人的船，表示他们船上的船员都是要很有经验的。
And so, and then the second group of passengers, just as we read here, includes the centurion.
这边记载到船上的有载的人，也有讲到这边百夫长。
In verse 1, it describes the centurion as the centurion of the Augustan regiment.
这边讲到说，第1节讲到说这个百夫长叫做尤留。
And so the Augustan regiment, to be the centurion of this Augustan regiment is a very highly respected position within the imperial Roman army.
这个百夫长他是一个非常高的地位，然后他要把这些人带去罗马。
And so as a centurion, he would have about 100 soldiers or legionnaires under his command on the ship as well.
做一个百夫长，他就底下面至少会有100个人来给他管理。
And we know that through history that Roman soldiers are very well disciplined and very well armed.
然后我们知道在历史上罗马的士兵他们都是经过非常多的训练，然后非常听从命令。
As we can tell from this passage, that the centurion is actually the one who is in charge of the entire ship and in charge of everyone on board.
然后我们这边看到说，这个百夫长他是负责这艘船，然后负责管理船上所有的人的。
His duty and the duty of the soldiers under him is to transport the third group of passengers, which are the prisoners, to Rome.
然后他的目的就是要把开船，然后把这些犯人带到罗马去。
And we know that Paul is included in these prisoners.
我们知道保罗也是在这个犯人其中之一。
From previous chapters of Acts, we see why Paul was on the ship for Rome.
我们前面可以看到为什么保罗会要在这艘船上，然后到罗马去。
In the previous chapters 25 and 26, we see that Paul had been brought on trial and accused by the Jews.
这边前面25章、26章那边讲到说，保罗被犹太人，然后要让他去审判。
And so they bring him before the governors Felix and Festus, as well as King Agrippa.
他们控诉保罗在亚基帕，然后还有其他王的前面审判。
And so while he is brought on trial, Paul takes the opportunity to preach to them.
然后在这边的时候，然后保罗用这些机会能够来传讲神的道理。
And each time, none of them can find anything to which they can condemn Paul with.
然后这些人都找不到能够让保罗定罪的事由。
But here, if we read the final verses of chapter 26.
我们来看26章的最后一节。
Let's look at chapter 26, verses 31 and 32.
31、32节。
And when they had gone aside, they talked among themselves, saying, "This man is doing nothing deserving of death or chains." Verse 32.
32节。
Then Agrippa said to Festus, "This man may have been set free if he had not appealed to Caesar." And so here we see that Paul, even though he is at the point of being found innocent, he appeals to Caesar.
我们这边可以看到说，保罗这边已经被确定他没有犯任何该被定罪的罪，可是他却要上告凯撒。
Paul wants to take the opportunity to preach to Caesar.
保罗想要利用这个机会，能够向凯撒传道。
And because he appeals to Caesar, therefore Paul is put on this ship to be transported to Rome.
因为他想要上告凯撒，所以他就必须要坐这艘船，然后去罗马。
And so Paul's intention, of course, it was by his own choice that he became a prisoner on this ship.
所以这边我们看到保罗他是自愿成为一个囚犯。
But of course, the other prisoners on this ship are certainly not prisoners by choice.
然后可是我们相信其他的犯人在这艘船上应该都不是他们自己选择要上这艘船的。
We have to understand that all the other prisoners are not just regular prisoners.
我们可以了解说，其他犯人都不是一般的犯人。
They are not criminals who committed small petty crimes.
他们应该不是只是犯了一些小罪而已。
So they were not criminals who should be locked up in a small local prison.
然后，所以他们只是应该被一个小监狱关着而已。
But instead, these prisoners had to be transported overseas to Rome.
然后，可是这些犯人要被运到罗马去。
They had to be guarded heavily by the Italian Augustan regiment.
然后他们必须要被这个百夫长，然后来管理监管。
And so these prisoners many of them have committed very severe violent crimes.
所以这些犯人他们应该都犯了非常大的罪。
They must have committed mass murder or tried to political influencers who try to overthrow the Roman government.
也许是杀了非常多人，或者是对罗马政府有非常不好的一些事情。
But regardless, it was not their choice to be on this ship to go to Caesar.
不管如何，这些人他们是不想要去罗马见凯撒的。
It's likely that most of them would be executed in Rome once they arrive.
理论上来讲，这些人可能到罗马都要被处以死刑。
Especially we know that back then, Romans, they used very bloody and very horrific executions as a form of entertainment.
然后我们也知道，罗马在历史上他们会用许多一些暴力或者是一些处以死刑来当做他们一个娱乐的事件。
And so when Paul, he initially warns the centurion not to sail.
然后，可是我们这边看到保罗当初警告这个百夫长说，先不要开船。
It's not a surprise that the centurion does not listen to him.
然后这个百夫长不听他的劝告，这其实并不让人感到惊讶。
The advice of the sailors and the owner of the ship is the one that speaks with much experience and skill.
然后这些船员还有船主，他们都是非常有经验的。
But in the eyes of the centurion, Paul is not just a criminal, but he is the worst of all criminals.
然后在这百夫长看起来保罗他就是不只是犯人，而且他是犯人中的犯人。
And so Paul, he has no authority and he has no credibility in the eyes of the centurion.
所以在这个百夫长面前，保罗他没有任何的信用可靠。
And so we see that in the middle of the storm, when Paul first speaks up.
所以当我们看到在这个风暴中保罗第一次讲话的时候
，Paul reminds them that not listening to him was a mistake.
保罗这边讲到说，你们本应该要听我的。
But Paul assures them that an angel of God had appeared to him and stood by him.
可是他这边也讲到说，神的使者向他显现。
And as we read in verse 24, the angel says to him, "Do not be afraid, Paul."
24节讲到说，保罗不要害怕。
And so this whole scene is certainly a very beautiful and comforting scene.
我们可以想象中，这是一个非常令人安慰的画面。
Oftentimes, when we feel discouraged or hopeless, it's very natural to feel very lonely.
当我们在低落的时候，我们常常会感到孤单。
Sometimes we feel very forgotten.
有时候我们会觉得都被遗忘了。
Even though we may be surrounded by many other people, we feel very distant from them.
也许我们周遭有许多人，可是我们会觉得有所隔绝。
That no one can really understand us or really help us solve our problems.
没有人可以帮助我们解决我们的问题。
But here we see that the angel, he reads Paul's heart.
这边我们看到这个神的使者了解保罗的心。
That he not only says, "Do not be afraid," but the angel is standing right next to him.
我们看到保罗这个神的使者跟他讲说，不要害怕，而且站在保罗的身边。
And so even though all the passengers on this ship, they are completely lost and they don't even know where they are in the middle of the sea.
虽然在这船上其他人都是非常的失落，而且不知道他们在哪里。
But God did not forget about them.
可是神没有忘记他们。
God knew exactly where they were.
神明确知道他们在哪里。
And so God was not just up high, watching them down below.
神不是远远的在观看他们而已。
But we see that the angel is standing right next to Paul in the ship.
看到这个天使就站在这船上，在保罗的身边。
And then he even calls Paul by his name.
然后他轻呼保罗的名字。
And so even though Paul may be lost and afraid,
也许保罗这边也是非常的失落以及害怕。
God is comforting him by saying, "I know where you are and I know you by name."
然后这边神是告诉他说，我知道你是谁，我也知道你在哪里。
In the Bible, we see many verses and passages where God, when it says that God knows us by name, it is relating to His grace for us.
这边如果神在圣经上记载到很多 地方，神知道我们的名字，也表示他有他的恩惠，对我们有他的恩惠。
In Exodus chapter 33, Moses, when he spoke to God face to face.
出埃及记33章，当我们记载到摩西跟神面对面讲话
，Moses he asked God for his presence to go with him and the Israelites.
摩西要求神让他带领以色列人。
And so God answers Moses that you have found grace in my sight, and I know you by name.
然后神对摩西说，我对你有恩惠，然后而且我知道你的名。
In Isaiah, God says that, "For I have redeemed you, I have called you by your name."
以赛亚神对以赛亚书神对以赛亚讲说，我已经为你赎罪，而且我知道你的名。
I have called you by your name, you are mine.
我知道你的名，所以你是我的。
And so when God he calls us by his own name, by our own name, it is because we belong to him.
所以当神叫我们的名字，表示我们是属他的。
That we have found grace in his sight.
我们在他眼中，他对我们有慈悲。
And as we continue reading on, the angel not only gives Paul words of comfort.
这边讲到说，这天使不只讲了一切安慰的话。
He also lays out the plan for how everyone on the ship will be saved from the storm.
他也这边天使也讲到说，这些人会的结果是什么
？The angel is very clear that God will indeed grant all those who sail with him, and there will be no loss of life among them.
这边天使讲到说，他们这些船上的人性命都会保全。
However, being delivered from the storm would not be easy.
当然，要从一个风暴中出来并不简单。
If we look at verse 26.
我们来看26章。
However, we must run aground on a certain island.
这边讲到说，他们必须要撞在一个岛上。
And so here it's very clear that in order to be saved, they would have to go through this very difficult and frightening task.
这边讲到说，他们要得救，必须要有一件危险的事情要发生在他们身上。
In order to survive, it would require the loss of the ship.
他们想要存活，就必须要失去这艘船。
And then it would of course require running the ship to the ground.
然后让这艘船会撞到岛上搁浅。
So if we read verses 27 to 32.
然后从27节到32节。
So Acts chapter 27 verses 27 to 32.
使徒行传27章27节到32节。
Verse 27, Now when the 14th night had come, as we were driven up and down in the Adriatic Sea, about midnight, the sailors sensed that they were drawing near some land. 28.
28节。
And they took soundings and found it to be 20 fathoms. And when they had gone a little further, they took soundings again and found it to be 15 fathoms. 29.
29节。
Then, fearing lest we should run aground on the rocks, they dropped 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for day to come. 30.
30节。
And as the sailors were seeking to escape from the ship, when they had let down the skiff into the sea, under pretense of putting out anchors from the prow. 31.
31节。
Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, Unless these men stay in the ship, you cannot be saved. 32.
32节。
Then the soldiers cut away the ropes of the skiff and let it fall off. Here we see that on the 14th night, once again, the ship starts to draw closer to land.
然后我们看到在第14天的时候，这个船慢慢靠近了地面。
And as they start to draw closer to land, the sailors go out and pretend that they are lowering down the anchors.
然后这边看到说，当他们觉得比较靠近一个岛的时候，水手假装出去要把锚抛下。
Here it says that the sailors, they feared that they should run aground on the rocks.
他们这些水手害怕他们船会搁浅。
And so this is against what was told by the angel on how to survive the storm.
这边跟天使想要跟天使跟他们讲的有一些出入。
So they are neglecting the advice that they heard from Paul.
所以他们不去听保罗的建议。
But this passage actually tells us that the sailors were only pretending to do that.
所以我们这边讲到说，这些水手只是假装要抛锚，
but in reality, they were just trying to escape using the skiff to get onto the land.
也就是这边水手他们只是想要用小船，然后逃到岛上。
In a way, this is foolishness.
不管这边看起来好像不是很聪明的决定。
It's not only because they had ignored the advice that they heard from Paul from the angel.
不止他们这边不听保罗还有从天使来的讯息，
But because they felt that they could use this skiff to actually escape from the sea.
他们觉得他们可以用这个小船来从海上逃走。
So even though they were drawing closer to the land, but they were still the water was still quite deep.
虽然这边他们已经也比较靠近陆地了，可是他们还是水还是很深。
But really, if they couldn't even maneuver the large ship, there was no way a small boat could survive the large storm.
所以这边讲到说，就算如果他们没有办法操控一个大船的话，他们更没有办法操控小船。
That the storm would immediately just would just knock over the skiff very easily.
因为如果一个风暴来，然后小船很容易就翻船了。
And so here, Paul, he is very aware of the situation.
所以保罗他对这个情况非常了解。
And so he immediately warns the centurion.
他跟百夫长说。
And so we see that the centurion and the soldiers, they cut off the ropes of the skiff and let it fall away.
然后，所以这边就这些兵丁就砍断小船的绳子，让它飘去。
With this motion, we see a significant change in Paul's standing.
我们这边可以看到保罗他的地位好像有一些改变。
Initially, we talked about how the centurion he chose to listen to the sailors instead of Paul.
我们前面看到说，这个百夫长他决定听掌船的还有船主。
And so, even though now there is no change in Paul's status, he is still very much a lowly prisoner.
虽然保罗在现在他还是一个犯人。
But now he has won the trust of the centurion and the soldiers.
可是他这边让百夫长还有兵丁得到一些他的信任。
If we remember when we read verse 16, we see that the skiff is something that they had gone through great difficulty to secure onto their ship.
我们在16节的时候看到说，他们非常想要保住这小船。
What had been once been a form of security and insurance now becomes a point of contention for them.
这是一个他们当初的保障，想要给他们一个的保护。
And so they listened to Paul's advice and they cut away the skiff.
可是他这边听了保罗的劝告，把这个小船的绳索砍断。
And if we think about it, it must be very difficult for the soldiers to cut away the skiff.
然后我们想想，这边对这些兵丁来讲，一定是非常难下的决定。
Even if they did not let the soldiers use the skiff, they themselves could have kept it as a backup for themselves.
因为他们不止如果不把船的绳索砍断的话，他们其实还是有这个备用方案。
But for them to cut it off is very much a symbol of how much they trust Paul.
所以这边他们砍断这个小船的绳索，表示他们对保罗的话有一定的信心。
So if we look at the next section, if we read from verses 33 to 38.
然后我们来看下一段，从33到33节到38节。
So Acts chapter 27, verse 33.
33节。
And as day was about to dawn, Paul implored all them to take food, saying, Today is the 14th day you have waited and continued without food and eaten nothing. 34.
34节。
Therefore I urge you to take nourishment, for this is for your survival, since not a hair will fall from the head of any of you. 35.
35节。
And when he had said these things, he took bread and gave thanks to God in the presence of them all. And when he had broken it, he began to eat. 36.
36节。
Then they were all encouraged and also took food themselves. 37.
37节。
And in all, we were 276 persons on the ship. 38.
38节。
So when they had eaten enough, they lightened the ship and threw out the wheat into the sea. So here in this section, we see Paul encourages the people to eat food for the first time in 14 days.
这边记载保罗叫大家吃一点东西，因为他们14天没有吃了。
And so even though this seems like a very small event, it's actually a very great miracle.
这边虽然是一件小事，可是对我们来讲是一个神迹。
In the beginning, we talked about how when they first faced the storm, they started to throw many things overboard in order to lighten the ship.
我们前面看到说，他们为了让船轻一点，然后把所有东西都丢下船。
But here we find out that they actually held on to quite a significant amount of food.
可是我们这边看到，他们其实船上还是有存留许多食物。
Enough that even after they eat, they have enough that they can throw overboard in order to lighten the ship.
这边看到说，他们吃饱了之后，然后还可以再把这些食物丢到海里，为了让船再轻一点。
And so there must have been a significant amount of food that it would have generated that much weight.
所以表示他们当初存下的食物并不少。
And so the question, of course, is if they had food with them all this time, why did they not eat for 14 days?
那问题就是，那为什么他们明明就有这么多的食物，为什么14天不吃呢
？It's because they have been in a heavy storm this whole time.
这是因为他们其实是有经过非常大的风浪。
It's not just that they are wet and cold from the storm.
不只是又湿又冷。
But with the large waves and the heavy wind, the ship is rocking back and forth very drastically.
因为有许多很大的风浪想象这船一定是摇晃得非常厉害。
And so the passengers on board must have been suffering from very severe motion sickness.
然后我们可以想象这些人应该是都是非常的不舒服。
And so whatever food they try to eat would have likely been thrown up or vomited out.
然后可以想象说，他们如果吃什么东西下去的话，应该很快就会吐出来。
And so it was bad enough to not have eaten for 14 days.
所以14天没有吃饭是非常的不舒服的。
But actually eating in the storm would have made them feel worse.
可是如果在大风暴里面，如果就吃东西会让他们感到更难受。
And so even though they had all this food on the ship,
虽然他们船上有许多的食物
we see that for the first 14 days, no one could eat any of it.
所以我们看到14天这些人都吃不下的东西。
Everyone is too seasick from the storm.
每一个人因为这个风暴的关系都晕船了。
But here we see that God performs a miracle.
可是我们看到这边有神做了一个神迹。
So even in the midst of rocking the boat, Paul still encourages everyone to eat.
虽然他们仍然还在风暴里面，然后保罗鼓励他们吃东西。
And so he prays in thanksgiving and he starts to eat the food.
所以保罗在众人面前祝谢，然后开始吃东西。
And all the other 275 passengers on the boat, they see Paul do this and they are encouraged to eat.
然后剩下的275个人，他们看到这个，然后就放下心来也开始吃东西。
And so even though on the outside the storm is still raging, nothing has stopped.
虽然外面还是在刮风作浪，
but in this moment, the motion sickness inside of everyone has suddenly stopped.
然后在这边看起来他们晕船的感觉好像都比较好了。
And so everyone is able to partake in this simple meal with joy and encouragement.
然后在这边他们就听了保罗的劝，然后让他们心里都比较安定。
And so if we can imagine that this food has been on the ship for at least 14 days.
然后我们想象这些食物在船上至少14天了。
It must have been soggy and wet from all the storm.
相信这些食物应该也都是非常的被雨水、被海水溅湿了。
But I imagine being able to eat for the first time in 2 weeks, no matter how bad the bread was, it must have tasted very good.
我相信就算这些被海水、雨水弄湿了，可是14天没吃，表示他们吃完应该感觉到还不错。
And so in this moment, even just to enjoy the simple things in life was very wonderful for them.
所以在这些风浪之中，他们做一个非常简单的事情，我相信对他们来讲是感觉非常良好的。
And so when we again look back at Paul's position on this boat,
所以
on
我
the
们
ship,
再来看保罗他的身份，
his status has always been that he is a lowly prisoner, a very evil criminal in their eyes.
在他的身份其实是没有改变的，他在其他人面前还是一样是一个罪人，是一个犯人。
Previously, the centurion listened to him, but the sailors did not.
前面那个百夫长听了保罗的劝诫，可是水手并没有。
So we see from the beginning, no one listened to him, but then his credibility started to build up.
最刚开始的时候，没有任何人听保罗的话，可是后来他的信用慢慢的增长。
Then we see that the centurion listened to him, but the sailors did not.
然后中间的时候，我们看到百夫长听保罗的话，可是水手并没有听保罗的话。
And the sailors tried to take their own matters into their own hands in the previous passage.
前面我看到说，这些水手想要用自己的方式来逃离这船。
But now in this moment, the Bible records that every single person on this boat followed Paul's example.
可是我们这边看到说，在船上的所有人都听了保罗的话。
And so the lesson for us is really, regardless of where we are in life.
所以这边我们可以学到说，不管我们生活是遇到任何事情。
So no matter whether we are in a position of high status or low status,
不管是我们有好高的地位，或是不高的地位，
that we can still always shine the light of God.
我们永远都可以把神的光照出来。
That in times of storms and in times of difficulties,
在不好或是在遇到风暴的时候，
how we carry ourselves really matters.
我们要如何把我们自己表现出来是非常重要的。
That the hardest moments of life are always the biggest test for us.
在我们遇到一些难处的时候，都是我们人生非常重要的时候。
That we see Paul had been no different from everyone else in the beginning, that he was also afraid.
我们这边看到保罗跟大家一样，他也是会感到害怕。
But we see that there is no faith, there is no courage without fear.
可是我们知道，我们如果没有害怕的话，我们就不会感到勇敢。
And so it's only in these moments of uncertainty that we see where Paul, he sets the example by shining the light of God.
我们看到保罗在这个难处当中，他把神的光照耀了出来。
And so God performs a miracle for everyone around Paul to be encouraged.
所以神施展了一个神迹，能够让大家感到鼓舞。
And we see that here, this eating of the food is not only for encouragement and for their nourishment.
这边吃食物不只是感到心中感到鼓舞，而且对他们身体也是有帮助的。
We see in verse 39, after they ate, they spotted some land which they planned to run the ship aground on.
第39节，当然他们吃完之后，他们看到一个海湾。
They plan to run the ship, if possible, onto this bay with the beach.
他们想，他们在决定，这船可不可以把它搁浅在这个海湾上面。
And so all the things that they had been afraid to do previously, they now had the courage to do.
然后他们原本不敢做的事情，然后现在有这个勇气去做。
And verse 40 talks about the actions that they take in order to do this.
然后第40节，我们看到他们为了要做这件事所做的事。
Verse 40 says, And they let go the anchors and left them in the sea, meanwhile loosing the rudder ropes, and they hoisted the mainsail to the wind and made for shore.
我们看到说，他们这边40节，他们砍断绳索，弃锚在海里，同时松开船绳，拉起头篷，顺着风向岸行去。
And so I did not really know what any of this meant.
我对这个一些记载好像不是非常了解。
The actions I didn't really understand.
我并没有很了解说为什么他们要做这些事。
But it's really these are obviously actions of a skilled sailor, right? Only a sailor would know how to do all these things.
我相信这只水手才知道为什么要做这些事。
And so previously we've seen that the sailors were the least willing to run the ship aground.
我们前面有看到说，水手他们是最不想要让船搁浅的。
Now they had the strength and the courage to overcome that fear that they originally had.
可是我们这边看到说，他们现在有这个勇气，有这个力量来去做这件事。
The food not only gave them a comfort, but it also gave them the courage they needed to run ashore.
食物不止给他们带来安心，然后也让他们带来勇气。
And so many times we see this own phenomenon in our lives today.
今天我们在我们生活上也看到许多这样的例子。
And so even though we may not physically be in the middle of a ship in a storm,
也许我们今天不会坐上一艘船，然后遇到风暴。
But whenever we have storms in our hearts, they tend to have very physical manifestations.
可是当我们心中有遇到风暴的时候，我们也会有不一样的展现。
That even though we are not in a boat, we also tend to struggle with the inability to eat if we are very worried or anxious about something.
就像比如说，我们非常担心某些事情的时候，我们可能也是吃不下。
And with our worries, we many times tend to not be able to sleep very well.
然后我们非常担心某些事情的时候，我们也会睡不好。
And so it's almost as if we are seasick without the storm.
就像我这边他们会有晕船，可是虽然我们没有遇到这个风暴。
And so we see how the story of the storm ends.
我们来看这个后来是怎么结束的。
It says that they run aground and all swim safely to shore.
然后我们看到说，他们要把船想要试着搁浅。
And so, for me, I keep wondering what is the purpose of Paul to go through this storm?
我们来想想，为什么这个经文保罗要经过这个风暴呢
？We know that our God is a very intentional God with His own plan.
我们知道神做所有事情都是有它的意义的。
In the Bible, we see many people who encounter storms, and it is for God to teach them a lesson.
我们知道，圣经上记载，有些人在他们生活上遇到一些风暴，是为了神要教导他们事情。
For example, Jonah, he faced the storm when he disobeyed God.
比如说约拿他不听神话的时候，他遇到一个风暴。
And so God used it as a lesson for Jonah to obey Him.
所以神用这个风暴让约拿能够听他的话。
And then also for Jesus, His disciples, they encountered the storm to show their lack of faith.
比如说耶稣的使徒，他们遇到风暴，然后让他们体会到他们自己的信心有多么的不足。
So the question is, why did Paul have to go through this storm?
所以我们这边来想想，为什么保罗会遇到这个风暴呢
？We know that Paul did not disobey God.
我们知道保罗他没有不听神的话。
We know that Paul also did not lack faith.
我们也知道保罗对神有信心。
The Bible never really answers that question.
圣经上没有直接的回答。
But in chapter 28, we see that they ultimately land on the island of Malta.
可是我们后来看到这个28章，看到说这个船最后在马耳他来停下来了。
Yeah, so this is an island just a little bit south of Rome.
这是在罗马南边的一个岛。
And so some reference materials say that this ship actually traveled 476 miles from the starting point all the way to Malta.
有些这边记载说，他们的船走了461个英里的距离。
And so we see that the storm had carried them very off direction.
然后我们看到这风暴让他们船偏离他们所要去的道路，
And so it actually ends up that they are delayed in Malta for an extra 3 months.
然后所以他们比他们原本的规划慢了3个月。
And so it is an additional 3 months before they finally get transported to the destination they had wanted all along in Rome.
所以他们原本3个月前就要到罗马，然后现在延迟了3个月。
But during these 3 months on Malta, we see Paul, he prays for and he heals many people on the island.
然后我们看到保罗在这个马耳他上面，他传道了，还有医治了许多人。
Of course, Malta had been an unintended detour for Paul.
对保罗来讲，去到这个马耳他岛并不是他原先计划的，
But it was an opportunity for him to preach the gospel there.
可是这是一个神给他的一个机会，能够在那边传道。
I also think about the other prisoners on the ship.
我也会在想说，船上的一些其他的犯人，
We mentioned that most likely many of them would have been executed once they arrived in Rome.
我刚才讲到说，许多犯人可能他们抵达罗马都会被处死。
And so whether they died in the storm or whether they died in Rome, does it really matter?
对这些兵丁来讲，为百夫长来讲，这些人在哪里死，对他们来讲并不重要。
But I think for them, and as well as the centurion and the soldiers, for them to spend an additional 3 months in Malta with Paul may have been a very wonderful opportunity for them to believe.
然后可是我相信，这些人在船上还有在岛上跟保罗一起待了3个月，一定对他们的生活信仰感到非常大的改变。
And so it's possible that these additional 3 months, this extension of their life, would have changed the outcome of their salvation.
然后这些犯人在多活了这3个月中，相信他们也许对他们得救来讲有的非常大的改变。
And so we see that it's likely that Paul encountered the storm not for his own reasons.
所以这边来讲，保罗遇到这个风暴，也许不是他自己的原因，
But it may have been for the benefit of everyone else on the ship.
也许这个遇到风暴的好处是为了其他船上的人。
And so if we look at Philippians chapter 1, verses 12 and 13.
我们来看腓立比书第1章
Philippians chapter 1, verses 12 and 13.
12、13节。
Philippians chapter 1, verse 12.
腓立比书第1章12节。
Verse 12. But I want you to know, brethren, that the things which happened to me have actually turned out for the furtherance of the gospel. 13.
13节。
So that it has become evident to the whole palace guard and to all the rest that my chains are in Christ. And so we see here, Paul understands the purpose of his suffering.
这边我们可以看到非常清楚，保罗知道为什么他在受苦。
We tend to think of when we go through trials or difficulties and suffering, we wonder, why did we have to go through this?
所以常常我们在遇到一些试炼的时候，我们会想说，为什么我们会遇到这些事？
We tend to rationalize it from our own point of view.
我们常常站在我们自己的角度去想这些事。
I benefited this way, I learned this lesson this way.
也许我们可以再从这边得到什么，学到什么。
But here we see that Paul says that for him, all these difficulties happen, it is for the furtherance of the gospel.
可是这边保罗讲到说，我所遭遇的事是叫福音兴旺。
That his chains are in Christ, and it is evident to everyone, even those who are guarding him, as to why he suffers.
13节，以致我受的捆绑在御营、全营和其余人中，以明显是基督的缘故。
We know that when Paul wrote the book of Philippians, he was in prison.
我们知道保罗在写腓立比书的时候，他是在监狱里。
Even still, he writes to rejoice. Again, he says rejoice.
可是他在他的书信里面讲到说要喜乐。
And so no matter where Paul is, whether a prisoner on a ship or a prisoner in jail, everyone around him sees God through him.
所以不管保罗是在船上或是在监狱里， 他的周围的人都可以从他身上看到神。
Even though he is in the lowliest of all positions, he is still a very wonderful example for everyone
虽
around him.
然他的地位是一个犯人，可是其他人可以从他身上看到不同。
And so, to kind of review the lessons that we learned from Paul in the storm.
所以我们在从保罗的遇到这个风暴上，我们可以学。
First, we see that help from God does not always come immediately.
我们可以学到说，从神来的帮助，也许不是最及时。
Even though God appeared to Paul on the third day, it wasn't until at least the 14th day that they got out of the storm.
虽然神派使者向保罗在第3天的时候显现，第3天的时候显现，可是到第14天，他们才比较离开了这个风暴。
And also that God's way out of difficulties is not always the easiest way.
然后也许神让我们离开这个风暴的方式，也许不是最简单的方式。
For Paul, it required the running the ship aground.
对这些人来讲，他们必须要让船搁浅。
That when they actually did run the ship aground, we see that it's very harsh. It is very violent.
我们知道让船搁浅，并不是一件很轻松的事。
Being saved from the storm required the sacrifice of the ship.
然后他们必须要失去这艘船。
Also, we see that Paul, he was able to win the hearts of the people in the storm.
我这边也看到保罗，他可以让因为这个风暴的关系，让得到许多人信任。
Even though he was a lowly prisoner, he always set a very good example and encouragement for everyone else.
虽然他是一个犯人，可是他给人家当成一个好榜样。
And many times, and we see Paul, he was very clear on his mission for why he suffered for Christ.
然后保罗这边也非常清楚知道他为什么会受到这些苦。
That everything he did was for the furtherance of the gospel.
他是为了这些，他做这些事情都是为了福音兴旺。
And so, to conclude, let's sing hymn 344.
所以我们最后来唱诗344首。